As the dust settles on Square Enix's new business plan, I felt that it would be pretty cool to kind of spin this off into a little bit of a new series. I don't know the name yet or what it's going to be called, but it's basically where I break down what exactly happened with certain momentous business decisions. So it's videos that I've done, but it will have more of a branding going forward in the future. But essentially, this one is looking at Square Enix and how they were wrong in the first place with their plan originally, and how their new business plan is going to do things a little bit differently and what they're planning to do. So explaining things a little bit further and going in depth into the issues and how they think they're going to resolve it, and also my own opinions on everything. Now let's get into the new business plan first, and then we'll do a bit of a compare and contrast with the old one. So if we're taking a look at the new business plan, I've essentially broken it down into very simple way of understanding what they want to do. They want the number one thing to be is focusing on fun. Games should be fun and making sure that player engagement is going to be at a priority with their games going forward. Number two, multi-platform AAA games, which include Xbox, Nintendo, PC, and PlayStation. Multi-platform AAA games. Remember that. Next up is worldwide business structure. So they want to have more of a structure in terms of their overseas business and their domestic business to be more in tune, in line, and in sync, so projects run more smoothly overall instead of the mass amounts of disarray that maybe they had with their projects beforehand, especially after they got rid of their Western studios like Tomb Raider. And then last is a 3-year investment rebuild plan where they're going to be investing a large sum of money to rebuild things and have things operational, ready to go in their new vision and format within 3 years. Now, the original business plan, and I'm joking with this one, but I'm kind of serious, is take money from whoever is willing to pay, no matter the damage it can do in the long run. Square Enix was seen as a mercenary, a company that will make multi-platform games for a lot of things, but hey, if you wanted to take Final Fantasy and make it exclusive, or if you wanted to take a certain franchise and make it exclusive, they will do that, no problem, whoever's willing to pay. And for a certain amount of time, it actually worked out. They had a string of successful games when it comes to exclusivity, and back when development costs were lower, and I think interest in Square Enix RPGs were at a higher maximum than they are right now at this point, at least with some of their biggest flagship titles like Final Fantasy, but that's not necessarily worked out at this point. And they've had, like I said, some good multi-platform hits, which we will talk about in a little bit, but things have pretty much turned on their head at this point, and Square Enix has ran into many different problems, but they have a plan. We just went over it, and I think that their new business plan can be successful if they follow a couple different things here. Now, let's talk about why exactly this exclusive PlayStation plan didn't work, because back when it was announced that there was going to be Final Fantasy VII Remake exclusive to PlayStation, Final Fantasy XVI, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and another game, people were very excited about the proposition of leveraging the PlayStation 5. The PS5 is seen as the de facto default system for many of the developers out there, so it seemed like a match made in heaven, and this would help have synergy between the two brands, like the PS1 era when we saw Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X all have record-breaking sales when it comes to the Final Fantasy franchise in their own respect. But at this point, that doesn't seem to be the case, or not even doesn't seem, it is not the case, as we've gotten an amount for Final Fantasy VII Remake that's under 10 million units with the PS4, PS5, and PC version combined, in addition to an amount that's under 4 million units that's announced so far for Final Fantasy 16, and an unknown amount number that we don't even know for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So that is a far cry from the millions upon millions from the 8, 9, 10, and above that the older Final Fantasy games used to do on the PS1 and the PlayStation 2. So what is happening there? Why did it not work out? Because it seemed like a good idea. And I think that there's a couple reasons why that this happened. Now, the changing landscape of gaming taste for PlayStation consumers, this has changed. It is not necessarily the same as it was in the PS1, PS2, and I'd even say PS3 era when it comes to what Japanese gamers are buying, and just overall worldwide what PlayStation gamers are buying the most. I would say especially compared to the PS1 era, this has changed dramatically. Western RPGs have become more to the forefront, obviously shooters and other franchises that have done extremely well on PlayStation. I'll give you guys an example. Helldivers, this is a game that has sold 12 million units plus across the PC and PlayStation 5 with a split of about maybe 60-40 or something like that. So we're looking at 5 million plus or so simply for the PlayStation 5 version of Helldivers 2, which is really good and definitely above where Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is. So there's a reprioritization of what games people are buying the most, whereas in the PS1 era, everyone would drop what they're doing in order to go out there and get the latest Final Fantasy. It doesn't matter if the game came out at the beginning of the life, the middle of the life of the system, the end of the life, you would see Final Fantasy at the top of everything, selling millions usually in like the first couple days, and Square Enix would be keen to announce those sales numbers, but that has just not happened here with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I also think that the Japan landscape of moving from the console gaming and what PlayStation had kind of like an iron grip on that over to more of Nintendo with the Switch. Obviously, this is a PS5 exclusive for many of the big AAA games when it comes to Final Fantasy, and that's not on Nintendo's system. Now, that's obviously like dual-fold. You have to take a look at Nintendo obviously having hardware that necessarily isn't the strongest out there to handle some of Square Enix's games, at least day and date or right then and there for easy ports, where you have to include other development teams. But then you also have to look at Square Enix's willingness to simply say, hey, we're going to throw this franchise, Final Fantasy, at the highest bidder, which was Sony. So it's a little bit of both. But if you look at the landscape of the actual gaming scene right now, it's basically Nintendo in domination in Japan. Now, worldwide, obviously it's different, but once again, we talked about how the tastes have changed when it comes to an overall worldwide scope of what gamers are playing. So you had less of an impact of a game like Final Fantasy at launch, and with the diminishing sales of the PlayStation brand in Japan when it comes to software sales and the system in comparison to what Nintendo's market share is, I think that created a very big situation and problem to where this exclusive PS5 plan did not work, whereas it worked a lot better when it came to Final Fantasy VII Remake in the PS4 era with that install base, and only about a couple years or so into the Nintendo Switch's reign, just starting out in Japan. So I do think that was one of the big things here. And I do also want to mention another thing here is that the changes in Final Fantasy in terms of what they did, this is not a typical Final Fantasy turn-based game that Japan was used to when it comes to the best-selling ones, with the exception of Final Fantasy 15, for example. That game sold really big in Japan, sold really big worldwide, and we'll get back to that game in just a bit, but I think that the fact that they did move over to completely action RPG, that they didn't necessarily remake the original Final Fantasy 7, and it's more of a retelling with all sorts of other things in there, I think that could have caused an issue with the franchises going forward. The action gameplay, multiple action games now, 3 in the past 4 years from 2020, with no big AAA turn-based Final Fantasy at all. Nothing else that they can say, okay, well, we also have this in order to satisfy those old customers, especially those Japanese customers. I think that drove away a lot of people from checking out these games, because there are still a large number of people who love turn-based combat, who want to play Final Fantasy in a turn-based type of format, and Square Enix provided nothing for those fans when it comes to console gamers and major AAA Final Fantasy with more of a traditional battle system. So I think that also could have led to some of the issues and the problems that they did have. Now, and I will say this as well, this is more of a minor situation, but I will mention it here. I do think that the issue with Final Fantasy 15 and the fact that Final Fantasy 15 was so overhyped, took a decade plus to come out, and it ended up just being okay or average. It wasn't like this was the oh my gosh hyped up game that reinvents the Final Fantasy franchise, and oh my gosh, everyone is rating this game absolutely incredible reviews and everything like that. It's not. It launched in a pretty tough state overall. There was issues when it comes to the game. You couldn't switch party members, and it took a while for all of that to be patched up and for all of that to be fixed. And I think by the time that all of it was done, people had already moved on and said, okay, well, I don't really like this, or I'm good with it. Even though it sold really well, it also was discounted to really low amounts, as low as like $5 to $10 at one point, where they did pick up a lot of sales after the first day or so, shipped 5 million copies. So I do think that there is some damage that was done with Final Fantasy 15 to help this plan just not work. Now, let's talk about Square Enix and what they had to say about the future. And this is very interesting because we have some new information on this. So we know that Nintendo is going to be involved with Square Enix's AAA games, Xbox, PC, PlayStation, but I think it's interesting because there was one company where this probably had a little bit more of an effect than other companies because of the shareholders, especially in Japan. Because when you mention Nintendo, obviously the Nintendo Switch is brought to mind, and the blockbuster sales being the third best-selling gaming device of all time, the second best-selling home console of all time. Now, the tweet from Stelp said this: Nikkei is reporting that Nintendo stock has risen 4 days in a row due to Square's change in strategy. While Square was one of the biggest supporters of Switch, investors are aligned with putting AAA Square games on Nintendo platforms. So that right there tells me that there is a lot of optimism that Square Enix will follow through with this. And if you have a big base, and especially in Japan where Nintendo Switch is dominating, or the next Nintendo system is probably going to come out and outsell every other system currently on the market very quickly, with the exception of the Nintendo Switch, I do think that there is relative reason to be excited about that if you're an investor, or excited about that if you're a gamer, to be able to get AAA Square Enix games on a Nintendo platform. And it's probably going to be a hybrid platform, so anywhere that you want. So we'll see what Square Enix does. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get graphics like a supercomputer PC, or maybe like the PlayStation 5 Pro or the Xbox Series, but you can create some really good looking games, and you can have them ported over to other systems that'll still look good and modern based on what we know so far with the leaked specs of the Nintendo Switch 2. But fun is their biggest situation. They want to focus on that with their games, and I think that's going to pay dividends for them, because that's what most companies will focus on, at least the Japanese companies, is fun first and foremost. You don't have to have the most cutting edge technology or game or anything. You want to make sure your games look good, but you don't necessarily need to have the best looking game of all time or the best looking RPG in order to be profitable, sell, and for people to buy the game. Now, and I do want to mention this as well, because I do think that Square Enix can't really afford to have another miss when it comes to a hit system. Now, with the whole Nintendo Switch's lifespan, yes, it did get AAA Square Enix games in addition to a lot of other games. So it's not like Square Enix didn't support the Nintendo Switch. They did, but a lot of the times it was late. Remember, Dragon Quest XI, that was 2 years later, and that was partly due to Nintendo, obviously the system itself, but the Unreal Engine 4 support just wasn't quite up to speed for them to get a port done well. So they have to actually recreate the game for the Nintendo Switch. You also look at Nier Automata. The game came out in 2017. The Switch version came out in 2022. So a number of years later, we still don't have any native of the real Kingdom Hearts games on the Nintendo Switch. It's all cloud-based stuff, even dating back to the PS2 games and all of that. So it's all cloud stuff because they didn't feel like porting over the engine and porting over all of those games. It would have been a mess overall. So I think that going forward, if you have the business plan of including Nintendo, you're going to get all of those things situated, because I don't think Square Enix can survive, especially if the Switch 2 blows up and it does really well and people are buying the games like we saw with the Nintendo Switch, which is a very high possibility. I think that you really can't afford not having the next Kingdom Hearts, not having the next Final Fantasy, not having the next Nier game, which seems to be in development, not having the next Dragon Quest. All that stuff needs to be day and date. All that needs to be on the Switch and be good enough. Doesn't have to be as good as PS5 and Xbox Series. Doesn't have to be as good as PC. But they just need to be competent, just like we saw with Dragon Quest XI-S on the Nintendo Switch, just like we saw with Nier Automata, the End of Your Edition on the Nintendo Switch. And don't do the cloud stuff. That needs to never happen again, outside of it just being an option for some gamers. But there should always be a native version and a physical version as well. So they really need to bank on Switch 2 in addition to Xbox, PlayStation, PC, and having that real multi-platform support in order to have your games do big numbers, because they've fallen behind when it comes to the biggest RPGs out there. Capcom's Monster Hunter series has lapped Final Fantasy at this point. That's multi-platform. They even had a specific game developed, AAA Monster Hunter, for the Nintendo Switch, and that sold 10 million copies on that platform. That is a ton of revenue that Square Enix never really took advantage of, because they didn't have anything up to that level day and date or right there built for the system. It was always stuff that was later. So this change in plan is a very smart thing, and I do think that if they do it right with these franchises like Kingdom Hearts, like Nier, like Dragon Quest, like Final Fantasy, they can build a big and loyal fan base, not only on PlayStation like they've done before in the past, but also on PC and the Nintendo Switch, and they might even get some Game Pass deals from Microsoft. So I think it's a win-win, very similar to how Atlas is going about it with Persona, where it's on everything, but they got Game Pass deals, and now Persona has become one of the premier JRPGs on the market, selling 10 million units plus with Persona 5 alone, and Persona 3 and Persona 4 are also doing incredibly well, and they moved away from that exclusive Sony type of situation too, but without getting any money from Sony, just making their games exclusive. So I think it makes complete sense with this business plan, and we'll see how everything works out in the future. So what are your thoughts on this, guys, when it comes to Square Enix and this new business plan, and how they're trying to fix it at this point, and how Nintendo platforms actually play a part in addition to PC, Xbox, and of course PlayStation? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch and RPG videos right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.